Hello, I'm Lindsay Sisk. Welcome to the Marriage Challenge podcast, brought to you by Care for the Family. In this episode, we're joined by Steve and Claire Musters, who are going to talk about the power of forgiveness and reconciliation in their relationship, which enabled them to overcome unfaithfulness. But first, let me introduce them. Steve and Claire have been married for 24 years. Steve is a church leader and Claire is a freelance writer, speaker and editor. She's recently written a book called Taking Off the Mask that was born out of the painful experiences from early on in their marriage. So Steve and Claire, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So before we get into today's topic, the first thing I want to ask is, how did you two meet and end up getting married?
Well, we actually met in a church youth group back in Bath, and we kind of were just really good friends.
Steve and a couple of his friends were some of my closest friends as we were growing up. And then I went off to college and Steve followed me up, and we actually got engaged within the first few months of me being at college.
That's lovely. Well, thank you for sharing that. So now looking at a topic that is often so difficult for people to talk about, and that's overcoming unfaithfulness. Would you be happy to tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, I think, as I said, we had obviously known each other a long time. We knew everything about each other. We had the same musical taste. We obviously shared faith. And getting married seemed like the obvious next step. And we were very close. But when Steve followed me up to London, he actually started working in a recording studio, and so his hours were literally round the clock, 24/7, 7 days a week. But it was once we were actually married that reality really hit.
Yeah, I suppose I knew Claire wasn't happy with my hours. To be honest, I wasn't happy with my hours, but I didn't know how to address it. And I think perhaps twofold really. I think one of the things is naivety. I didn't realise quite how lonely Claire was. And perhaps secondly, I didn't really want to really dig into that because I didn't know how to fix it. And if I don't know how to fix things, then I can quite easily ignore them, which was probably one of my biggest mistakes.
Yes, I would probably say that I actually felt abandoned. And I had very idealistic notions of what marriage would be. And I didn't do marriage prep. So nobody had challenged my romantic notions of what married life would be like. And I was struggling with finishing a degree and being on my own. And then I landed a dream job in a publishing company. It was wonderful. And from the outside, everything looked great. But I was then beginning to be fed phrases like, "I can't believe you've been abandoned by your husband and you're married so young and it's by people at work." And I kind of lapped up that kind of attention, and it really fed that lie to me. It was probably when somebody else started giving me attention that I started questioning, have I actually married the right person? And then when I was given an ultimatum by them, but when they said they were leaving and was I coming too, I foolishly jumped ship because I didn't see any other alternative.
And I think for me as well, it felt for me like, wow, this has come from out of the blue. And of course, it wasn't out of the blue at all. It had been brewing for a long time. And yeah, it was just like your entire world is turned on its head. And I think anyone who's kind of experienced that realises it is probably one of the most painful experiences you can go through. Totally shattering.
So that sounds like at that time it was a really painful time for you both. You left the marriage, had gone with another person. Steve, presumably you were just shattered by that. How did you manage to work through that and get to the place where you decided that actually you did want to be reconciled to one another?
I think Steve said right from the word go that he didn't want our marriage to be over and that he would fight for me. I was really hurting and I'd pinned all my hopes on this other person. But within 2 weeks, he actually turned to me and said, "I've seen the way that I've given you space. I've seen the way that I've been so kind to you. I've never done that to my wife. I need to go back to her and see if I can make things work." And I just was left absolutely shattered. It's like, well, feeling like I had egg on my face as well, because I've thrown everything away, thrown the person that I've known the longest in my whole life away. Everybody, all our friends knew. And here I am now totally on my own. I was just like getting towards my 30th birthday and now my life is a total wreck. But the person I rang immediately, the person I picked up the phone to and rang was Steve, and I did it without thinking. I didn't think about how horrific it must have been, everything I'd put him through, and now I was laying all of this on him as well. But he was my best friend, and he always had been growing up as well. And I just did it instinctively, and it was the way that he responded that gave hope for our marriage.
Yeah, I think for me, I was absolutely determined not to be another statistic, that I believed that we had a future together, and I wasn't going to let that go without a fight. But one thing I do remember is there was a very particular moment where I came to a crossroads where I had to make a choice. And that was, do I go down the path of resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness, how could she, and just kind of wallow in that, even for a moment? Or do I choose to forgive and trust again? And I think that's probably been the biggest journey, because it is, and we talk a lot about earning trust, but I think what I discovered was that actually trust is a choice. We choose to trust again. So I had to get to that point where wherever Claire was at, which I didn't really know, but I had to choose to be prepared to put my heart on the line again. And it's a daily choice. It's something that day by day, no, I choose to trust. I choose to risk it all again. And I think you have to make that choice as early as possible to keep the door wide open. And
I think Steve brought me back to our home, and then he took all my belongings, and I was working freelance by that point, my computer, and I went and lived with my parents for a good few months, just while we kind of battled out whether there was a future, and to give me some space. But the way that he dealt with it, he was very gentle, really gracious. He allowed me to talk about my hurt without actually sharing that much of it. Wasn't till afterwards that I realised how much I put him through. We went down the line of we needed counsellors. We obviously had got married really young and had gone straight into a very unhealthy situation where we just were never together. And so we had to put in foundations that had never been put in at the start of our marriage. It was not easy at all. And we both had moments where we were just incredibly hurt and just needed some space. But we loved each other through that. And it helped us to understand where we were both at and the broken parts in our lives. And so I guess we just learnt to share those openly, as well as remember why we were together in the first place. So we kind of did that in tandem. And it was really hard work, but so worth it.
Yeah, I knew changes had to be made, because otherwise it's so easy to slip back into old habits, old patterns. And, you know, with the way my brain works, I just think, well, that was a really horrible time. We're over that now. And then you slip back into old habits. And I knew things had to change. So very practically with my job.
Yeah, I have to say that was the thing that blew my mind most of all. I mean, he was working in a recording studio and they work around the clock. But Steve actually, one of the things that really showed me how much he was determined to make it work, he went to his boss and explained everything that had happened and just said, look, what can we do? And then he ended up probably being in the only recording studio that locked its doors at 8 p.m. They actually made that change, and I thought he'd actually had the guts to own up that there were struggles going on. It was fantastic that his boss supported him, and it just made such a huge difference that I had my husband home for part of each evening.
That's great. So it sounds like for both of you that was a difficult process, and actually a lot of forgiveness needed on both sides, on both of your parts, in order to be able to reconcile. How has your experience changed you as a couple, do you think?
Good question. For me, I would say I've had to be a lot more emotionally intelligent and not bury my own feelings. Learn to communicate a lot more. It's all about communication. Obviously, relationships are all about communication. And I was very good at just dealing with stuff in my own mind, in my own head. And that added to the sense of isolation for Claire. It's still a process, but I think that's one area through this time I've had to learn to be a lot more in tune and in touch with my emotions and communicating them well.
Yeah, I would say communication is the biggest thing. And saying sorry was something that I found really difficult. I remember when we got married, our youth pastor actually said to Steve, "You are going to have to say sorry first because Claire won't." And everybody thought it was a hilarious joke. But I actually used that in the first years of our marriage. So, well, you were told by our pastor that you needed to say sorry first. And I found it really difficult. And I defended myself even when I came back. It was like, well, I was so hurt. That's why I did what I did. To actually humble myself enough to say, okay, I really messed up big time. And actually, I have got ways of thinking that are wrong. I'm projecting things onto you that I shouldn't be. And having the guts to say, okay, that's wrong. We need to work out the way that we should be expecting things from each other and how we do our lives together.
So over the last 16 years or so, what practical things have you put in place to rebuild your relationship and keep it strong?
I have to say, we learnt so many bad habits at the beginning of our marriage that we can struggle with this at times, and we have to be really conscious of it. And one of the main things that we try and do is to have that at least one night a week where it's just space for us.
You can get complacent in a relationship. You can allow things to just tick over. Even now, we are having to fight complacency all the time. And it seems so long ago now, this incident, and you can almost think of it was like a different life, but I think that's really unhealthy. And I think we need to keep on going back to, we need to keep working at it. We need to keep remembering what is it that, what is it that my wife really enjoys and what fills her emotional tank. And it's just thinking constantly of ways and to throw off complacency and apathy in a relationship. And I think that's something that it's a lifelong lesson, but certainly one that that's been highlighted to me.
I'm sure there are couples listening who are going through difficulties at the moment, maybe through unfaithfulness or deep hurt or separation, but who want to reconcile and rebuild their relationship. What advice would you give to them?
I think the main thing is to recognise that you're not alone. It took us years to admit to anybody, and it took a crisis. And so just be honest with people. If there is another couple that you're close to, or a family member, or obviously we're involved in church, if you've got a pastor, if you go to church, or a counsellor if you want to talk to somebody who doesn't know your personal situation, but actually begin to speak about it. Sometimes having that secret is a bigger power over you, and it just feels like we can't do anything to make this better because we don't quite know what to do, we don't know how to voice it. But just beginning to speak to another person breaks that, and you can get another person's perspective. But I would just say also be willing to be humble enough to be honest with each other about where you've got weak points in your marriage, what the particular difficulties are and the reasons behind them, and be gentle with each other as you do that, because if you're going through difficulties, at least one of you, probably both of you, are hurting. So you need to be careful and take it slowly and gently, but begin to unpack. So think about practical ways that you can move forward.
And just to say, there is always hope. There is always hope. And our story is one of real redemption. You know, we've seen how we've been able to help others through what we've been through. And that is a wonderful kind of fruit that's come out of a really bad situation.
Well, Steve and Claire, thank you so much for all that you've shared.
You're very welcome.
Before we finish, in every episode of the podcast, we ask our guest couple to give us a marriage challenge, perhaps something practical that listeners can try in the coming weeks. So thinking about everything that we've talked about today, do you have a marriage challenge that you could set our listeners?
Yeah, I think one of the things that took me back a bit when we first went to counselling, the first question they asked was, why did you start dating your partner? What was it that attracted you in the first place? And I actually think that's a really great thing. When we are trapped in the pain and the difficulties, we can lose sight of that so easily. So I would suggest take some time out just to really think about why you were attracted to your partner. What are the qualities that drew you to them? And tell them in some way, maybe write them a letter or express it in a way that you know they would appreciate it. Take that time and carve out that space.
Yeah, it's an investment, absolutely.
Well, that's brilliant, thank you, and actually something really useful that people can try and will make a real difference, so thank you for that. Well, that's all for this episode. It just leaves me to say thank you, Claire and Steve, for joining us, and we look forward to tackling another marriage challenge next time. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
You have been listening to the Marriage Challenge podcast. For further information about our courses, resources and events, visit us at www.careforthefamily.org.uk.